Hello, my name is Ruth Steverlynck. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with Thayer Willis. As well as being a renowned author and an acclaimed speaker, Thayer also works as a psychotherapist in the area of the psychological impact that wealth has on both individuals and families. Thayer, welcome. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank
How are
you. I'm delighted to be here too. I'm fine.
Good. A lot of focus there in families is put on the financial aspects of wealth, and yet we know that the impact can be very significant for families on the psychological side. What are some of the main mistakes that you see families making as they're considering the transition of wealth to the next generation?
One of the biggest mistakes families make is what I call too much too soon. And many people have noticed this in the media and in families they know. When children are brought up with great luxuries, private jets, flying to exotic locations, and credit cards with no limit, and knowledge about the family fortune, including the amounts that really is inappropriate for children to have.
Right.
It's best if children can grow up with as normal a life as possible.
Right. So what are if you were to help our clients understand what the main attributes of a successful transition of wealth would look like, what are some of the key indicators that you see where it has worked really well? What have families done?
A big key indicator is the love in the family. And love is not normally a concept that's talked about in the realm of financial wealth, but the truth is that if people in the family care more about each other than they care about the money, that is a huge step in the right direction.
Right. So in your practice, you work as a psychotherapist.
Yes.
And your focus is really on the psychological impact that money can have on individuals. What are some of the main challenges that you see from a psychological perspective where it affects people's lives?
Relationships are a big challenge, and when people inherit wealth, all of their relationships are affected by that, and many times people are not prepared for that. Sometimes I advise people to look to their oldest friends for support and for being their confidant. Right. Because sometimes the newer friends are there for the wrong reasons, and even in relationships, in all the relationships people have, whether it's parents, children, siblings, your spouse or who you're dating, or co-workers and professionals that you work with, all of these relationships are impacted by wealth, especially when wealth arrives in your life, and on an ongoing basis as well.
Right. So what are some of the things that you can do to help manage the impact on relationships? Where would you advise families to focus on?
The place to start is really knowing yourself. And sometimes I think that the things that I teach sound trite because they seem so simple, but really knowing yourself is the place to start, and finding out who you are as a wealthy person. And for some people that's very difficult. Some people have preconceived ideas about what rich people are like, and they don't want to be one of them, and all of a sudden here they are, and they have wealth of their own, and so it can be very hard to integrate that. And there are other kinds of circumstances that make that difficult as well, where perhaps their experience in their family of origin has been scary or painful, or both, and integrating the financial capital into their lives can be symbolic for them and can be very difficult. So it is really establishing a healthy, strong relationship with yourself that is the place to start.
Right. So when I think about that, knowing yourself, and I think about values, having a real sense of what your values are.
Yes.
What role does values play for the intergenerational transfer of wealth in your experience?
In the intergenerational transfer of wealth, the role that values play is in the example that is set by parents.
Right.
Parents need to be the example that they want to see their children follow. As we all know, example speaks much louder than any words we say. And the most important values in life are caught, not taught.
Right. That's a very good thought to consider. When you think about key tools that families could use, their goal is to make the wealth force for good in the lives of the next generation. What would some of the tools be that you would bring to families to help them ensure that that vision of it being a force for good is realized?
Yes, I would encourage families to develop teamwork in their families. Many people don't really think about that. Right. And teamwork has to be cultivated. There's skills that need to be developed. People need to learn to make decisions together, and they need to learn to be supportive of each other. And a lot of this needs to be taught. Right. People in families are better off when they know the strengths, the behavioral strengths, the psychological strengths of their family members, which will differ one from another, and how to access those best, how to make that work for the family and not against the family. And there are great teamwork exercises that people can use and that I use in my work, and there are many ways to access those skills and getting better at them. So teamwork is a really important way that people can help their families thrive. And another way is communication. Right. We all can communicate, of course. We all can be better at it. And so there are communication skills that are relatively easy to practice and work on. For instance, body language. Body language is very significant and powerful. And there's assertiveness. People can learn to be better skilled at being assertiveness and saying what they really mean in a way that people can hear, as opposed to being aggressive or being passive. Those are two opposite ends of the spectrum that are neither one of them is effective. Being assertive is a really useful skill that is not practiced very well in general. Right. And another skill that is helpful in families, as of course it is outside of families, is listening well. And again, we all can listen, and we all think that we are good at it. Sometimes I use a listening exercise in my work that really underscores how difficult it is to listen well and to not be sitting there waiting to talk or planning what you're going to say or daydreaming, which a lot of us do a lot of the time. And it is really powerful to be listened to. I mean, we all have experienced that. And so we all know what that's like, to feel like we are really heard. It has tremendous power in relationships.
And are there any sort of exercises that you give families to help build some of that cohesion that you've talked about, that translation of values, maybe questions that you ask families to ponder? Yes, there are questions that we call shareholder equity questions. These are questions like, are individual family members happy? Another question is, have individual family members taken charge of their lives? Are family strengths evident? Right. These are questions that the older family members know the answers to these questions. As we look at our younger family members, if you imagine a holiday dinner table and you have your family seated around, and you can look at each family member and realize whether or not they've taken charge of their life. I mean, you know that, and that's very important. And if someone in the family, or 2 or 3 people in the family, are struggling, maybe you're the one who can find them a mentor in the family, or even outside of the family. But you know, that's an area where you can help, because as long as people are struggling and really have not taken responsibility, have not taken charge for who they are and what they're doing, if they're still blaming others or just floundering or drifting in life, a lot of those young people could use some help. And in families, strong families have the power to provide that. Right. So what I'm hearing as a common thread through our conversation is that the attention that's paid to the financial aspects of transition of wealth, which we all know that's where the main focus is put, really the same amount of attention and work and effort has to be put on building the skills and the capacity and the love and the cohesion and the ability to listen and communicate well. We really have to pay particular attention to that in order for the wealth transition to be a positive experience.
Absolutely, that's true. And it's in a way harder. There are lots of experts in financial money management, and they're very good at it, and it's quantifiable. It's easy to see when you have success in that realm. And these other areas, the areas in which I work, are often called the soft side, and they're often seen as messy and hard to evaluate. And yet they are, I would say, at least as important as the financial aspects. I mean, because what if you have a big pile of money and it's growing? It's getting to be a bigger and bigger pile of money. And yet you have family members who have a trail of broken relationships and work that they don't like, or no work at all. And you have people who are just drifting through life. They're dilettantes. They really never sunk their teeth into anything and made life work for them. I mean, what do you really have? I don't call that wealth. Really, if you look at wealth in a broad sense, if you define the word broadly beyond the financial, then it's very important to attend to all of these other kinds of assets.
And do you think these things that you're talking about are more prevalent in families of wealth than families that...
I don't think they're more prevalent. I do think they become amplified. The wealth typically amplifies whatever's going on in a family. It's all the same issues that are caused by human nature. So there's jealousy, there's envy, there's pain, and there's people take offense and people become defensive. All of that goes on in all families. It just is amplified where there's wealth.
Yeah, I would imagine there's perhaps some shame as well in admitting that you're struggling, and maybe that's more amplified when there's money, that you don't want to admit that you're struggling because people have an attitude of, well, what's your problem? You've got lots of money.
Yes, that's true. And people in wealthy families know that people who don't have wealth assume that they have it easy. And so they know better than to complain to anyone outside of the wealthy people that they know. And they may not know anyone or feel close enough to anyone to make that kind of confidence anyway.
So that might be a barrier to getting the help.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's really how I started doing what I do. I grew up in a wealthy family, and I was aware that in the neighborhood where I grew up, I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but later as I looked back on it, I was aware that there were kids in these wealthy families who really felt isolated and who didn't have any access to any help that they could perceive. And it seemed tragic to me when I realized that.
So I think one of our key messages is to pay attention to the psychological impact that it can have on individuals within families in order for it to be a force for good.
Definitely, and don't assume that nothing is going on in the psychological, in the relationship dynamics. Don't assume that nothing is happening, that everybody's okay, just because nobody's saying anything.
What is one of the main assumptions that you think people make about inheriting wealth that's perhaps not a healthy assumption?
I found early in my work that people assume that, especially young family members, assume that they've been given so much, they assume that they're also going to have a meaningful life. And without even really thinking about that consciously, the way I discovered it was that I said that one time when I was working with a big extended family. And I saw on the faces of some of the young family members that this was news to them, that if they wanted to have a meaningful life, they were going to have to make that. No one was going to give them that. And that was news. And so I have learned that it's important to point out to wealthy families that we all inherit some kinds of things in life. Some people inherit athletic ability or great intellect or fabulous good looks or even the quality of resourcefulness. And some people inherit financial wealth. None of us were given a meaningful life. We have to build that for ourselves.
One of the things that worries me a little bit, if I listen to what you're saying, is that some of our listeners may be sitting going, oh my goodness, my children are, in their late teens or early 20s. We haven't focused enough on this. Are we too late? We haven't done the work that maybe we should have done. We've been too busy creating the wealth or too distracted. Is it ever too late to develop the psychological muscle of having a positive impact, the wealth having a positive impact?
It is never too late. I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's true that ideally we start working with very young children in an excellent way. And the reality is that most parents don't do that for reasons that you described. Some people are building their wealth, and all parents are busy figuring out how to parent well and making mistakes. That's true of all parents. And so a lot of times it is older offspring that parents are concerned about, late teens, early 20s, even into their 30s. Some children are still struggling. They still don't have their bearings. They don't have financial literacy. They haven't taken responsibility, haven't taken charge of their lives. And it is never too late. It is always, all of the principles that we've been talking about apply to kids who are older as well. And you can put those into effect, to work at any point.
So Thayer, you talk about giving too much too soon. So what is too much and when is too soon?
That's a good question. It's hard to answer it because it varies from one child to another.
Right.
However, the general guideline would be to wait. It's really better if kids don't know much when they're growing up about family wealth. That really should be the territory of the parents, and it should be kept in the background. And as I said earlier, I believe in giving kids as normal an upbringing as possible. And that's really for the kids' benefit, so they can relate to more people in the world. And some kids will take on the steps of financial literacy, learning to save money and spend wisely and give money away. Some kids will take that on well, and they'll earn money when they're teenagers and maybe even a little bit before. And they will learn about business, they'll learn some basics about investing. And those kids can be brought safely into knowledge about family wealth probably sooner than the ones who won't learn that, or who really fight it, or who don't have any interest. But even still, even with that said, I would delay that kind of information, especially any numbers, until well into their 20s and preferably 30s or 40s. There's really no need for young adults who are busy building their lives to know about the amount of the fortune in the family. If anything, that has the potential to demotivate them, and that is a big concern. It's really better to keep that knowledge in the background and bring it out much, much later, 40s, 50s.
And focus rather on building some of the skills that will be required.
Build the financial literacy.
Right. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about philanthropy as being maybe a tool that would be good to build some of the skills. Can you talk a little bit about the role that philanthropy can play?
Yes, philanthropy is an excellent tool. And that really is a great way to teach financial literacy and also to teach skills for wealth management. It teaches teamwork, it teaches research, it teaches caring for other people, and it teaches kids to understand business. You can add the component of investing as they get older, and the kids can be responsible for investing the funds that produce the income that is given away. And there are lots of ways to start a philanthropy program in the family, very small, and then build on it and add one of these steps that I mentioned each year. And you can increase the amount of money that is given away as the kids get older, as they're in their teenage years. And there can even, in some families, they can move into a family foundation. There are junior foundations. There are lots of ways to build on this concept, and it's absolutely great. What I like about it is that they are developing this for others, and they're getting educated along the way. And so they're not so much focused on, this is my money, and what am I getting out of this? It's really more of an education for them.
What am I giving?
Yeah, what am I giving? And for them to get interested in doing well because they want their causes to have more money.
Right, right.
That's
it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah. So Thayer, if there was one last message, sort of the bottom line for our listeners in terms of, ensuring that the transfer of wealth is a positive for the next generation, would you have some closing words?
I would say the bottom line is, especially for successful entrepreneurs, and certainly for parents who are doing well, don't rob your kids of the very kind of opportunities that have made you who you are.
Right.
Let them make their mistakes and don't overfund them. Let them get out there and make their way in the world.
Thank you so much, Thayer. This has been really helpful. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more about Thayer and access some of the wonderful resources that she has on her website, please go to thayerwillis.com. Thank you.